So this discussion, we're going to look at the legal aspects of therapeutic medication management. So as athletic trainers and being a part of the sports medicine team, part of our responsibility is to deal with all different types of medications with our patients. This is just going to talk about, again, obviously the legal parts of that and just some ways that in the day-to-day management of your athletic training facility, how medication should be handled. So the first thing to look at is looking at healthcare providers with prescribing authority. So just to make mention first, so again, prescription versus over-the-counter medications. Obviously, over-the-counter medications are just medications you could go to any type of store and just buy on your own. They're not necessarily, they don't necessarily come with any potential dangers. Obviously, people can misuse them, and we'll kind of talk about that kind of in other topics later on. But over-the-counter medications, any person could go and just buy them, whereas a prescription requires, if it's a prescription drug, it requires a medical prescription to be dispensed. So in order for a person to get those particular drugs, there has to be a specific prescription in order to get them. And there's really, there's two kind of subtypes, I guess, if you will, of prescription drugs. There's just your regular prescription drugs, and there's also what we call controlled substances, which they're also only required via prescription, but there's some tighter regulations regarding them. Now, state laws are going to vary with who can and who can't prescribe medication. So we're going to talk about examples of providers with prescribing authority. So obviously your MD or DO, so your medical doctors or your osteopathic physicians, they have the broadest, if you will, prescription authority. So they could prescribe both controlled or scheduled substances and your common prescription drugs. A physician assistant or a nursing practitioner, depending on the state, they possibly may be able to prescribe controlled substances. They could obviously prescribe, in many cases, regular prescription drugs, if you will. There is the chance that they can also prescribe controlled substances. Your pharmacist, so a person that has that works in a pharmacy, they have a doctor of clinical pharmacology. Some states allow them to prescribe under protocol with a medical provider. So again, they can have some potential prescribing authority. When we look at some other healthcare professionals, so podiatrists, optometrists, dentists, clinical psychologists, they can prescribe medications specific to their practice. So they do have kind of like some limits to what they can prescribe. So for instance, optometrists can prescribe medications to treat certain eye diseases, and they could also obviously issue glasses and corrective eyewear. Dentists can prescribe like antibiotics, they can prescribe local anesthetics, things of that nature. Clinical psychologists obviously can prescribe drugs related to, to mental disorders and emotional disorders. And then chiropractors, dependent on the scope of practice and location. So chiropractors may have the ability to write prescriptions. Again, it kind of just depends upon the laws. So the bottom line is, in many instances, laws in states are going to dictate what healthcare providers can do. So now, athletic trainers cannot prescribe medications. We're going to talk about, again, in this chapter, really what the role of the athletic trainer is in managing medications. But in all instances, regardless, any healthcare provider going into a state, you should be aware of what those individual state regulations are. So again, a healthcare provider, again, just follow the specific dispensing administering laws, and we'll kind of talk about what the difference is between administration of a drug, dispensing of a drug, and we'll talk about that later on in the discussion. Okay, so looking at the sports medicine team, so again, there's various providers maybe within a sports medicine team. Obviously, in most settings that we work in as athletic trainers, it's usually, obviously, a big part of the team is the athletic trainer working under the direction of a of the team physician. However, depending upon your work setting, there may be others involved as well. So again, there could be individuals with various expertise, background, scopes of practices. The important thing is, as it relates to medications, particularly from an athletic training standpoint, is again, having proper protocols in place. So again, storing, packaging, transporting, tracking, administering, and dispensing drugs. If you're going to be doing that at your facility, again, it's important to have organizational things in place. So again, injured patient care may be from a sole healthcare provider, from the team. Again, communication with that's going to be important. As far as looking at the role of the directing physician, so pretty much regardless the work setting, as an athletic trainer, you're going to be working under the direction of a physician. So you're going to have a supervising physician. That supervising physician is going to have standing orders in place. And again, those standing orders will be based upon what, partially what they feel comfortable with having you do, but obviously they also have to align with state guidelines. So the role of the directing physician, they're going to be responsible for the medication documentation, storage, and disposal. So they're going to play a major role with that. So the team physician really takes on the leadership role, and they're going to be kind of keeping track of, again, particularly as it relates to medications. If there are medications stored at the sports medicine facility, they're going to be kind of overseeing that with the individual medication. Now, it should be noted that the Accreditation Association for Ambulatory Healthcare accredits many college health centers. So really that, along with, like, say, for instance, the Joint Commission, which is an organization responsible for also accrediting health centers and hospitals, they've developed specific standards that have to be followed regarding medications, and particularly sample medications. So for instance, it's not uncommon in a physician's office for them to give out samples of prescription medications. There's some limits as far as, one of the things that, many times will happen is physicians will dispense or give out multiple doses of sample medications. You have to look at what the laws are going to be related to that, and there's specific standards that these accrediting bodies have come up with as far as it relates to dispensing meds of that type. So that's going to be important to make sure that that everyone's aware of the regulations regarding that. Another thing that a physician has to know, if they're involved with an international team, they have to know what the prohibited medications are. So again, the athlete's ultimately responsible for avoiding prohibited medications, but if need be, they should try to obtain a therapeutic use exemption, but the physician should definitely be aware of what's going to be banned and what they have to kind of be on the lookout for with athletes on an international team. So looking at the role of the athletic trainer, this is probably the most relevant thing that we all want to look at here. So an athletic trainer cannot dispense prescription medications, okay? Now that is unless authorized by individual state practice acts. So that's an important thing to note. So they cannot dispense prescription medications, even under standing orders, and that's partially because of legal liability issues there, okay? So dispensing cannot be authorized. Again, if a state does allow that in their practice act, that's fine. Many states, though, do not allow that to be, it's not even allowed with verbal permission from the physician. So again, there's a little bit of tighter regulation related to that. Now, what is allowed is over-the-counter drugs and specific emergency prescription medications. So the specific emergency prescription medications are things like, many times, like epinephrine. So for individuals who, say have severe anaphylactic reactions with allergies, they'll have an EpiPen. That's something. Naloxone, which is something that people take for overdoses of specific drugs. Those are things that in an emergency situation can be given out by an athletic trainer. But again, the bottom line is, and you're going to hear this a lot of times, is that always make sure, again, as a responsible healthcare professional, you should be looking at state practice acts. And we're going to talk later on, so we're going to be talking about the difference between administration of a drug versus dispensing. Athletic trainers are in a position where they can administer over-the-counter drugs. They still are typically not allowed to dispense even an over-the-counter drug, and we'll talk about the difference between those two practices later on. Again, so must follow current state and local laws. Again, some states allow physicians to delegate authorities to other healthcare professionals. Again, if that's allowed, that should end up being in your State Practice Act. So that's going to be a really important thing to make note of. Again, AT may act as a caretaker or agent of the physician. So again, you're going to want to, again, have things in place with those standing orders to protect everybody from liability. In the end, the physician is still going to be responsible for storage and various other precautions. So your team physician is going to want to make sure that, you know, where the drugs are kept, how they're kind of managed, and things of that nature. So again, ATs in many work settings all have proper, it's again important to have proper storage and dispensing guidelines. Federal and local laws have to be followed when at home and when traveling. So again, when you're going to travel, again, how you're traveling and how those drugs are going to be stored when you're traveling, particularly, and even probably more so when you look at international travel. So if you are going to travel internationally, look at what those laws are, you know, discuss things with your team physician as far as what you will be, taking with you on those trips. So continuing on with the role of the athletic trainer, so, you know, probably one of the more important things is you're going to be a medication resource for the patient, to be able to educate them on medications, how they should be taking them, as far as that's concerned. One of the things that an athletic trainer should have is a formulary, which is just a list of medications. You know, for instance, whenever an athletic trainer is traveling, they should have a list of medications somewhere. And they should even kind of have, again, an inventory in-house as far as what's actually getting stored at the athletic training facility. Again, an athletic trainer is going to develop storage inventory documentation policies for the facility. Again, noting, you know, inventory is really important, tracking, having documentation every time, whether it's a medication that you administer to a patient, or if your team physician comes in and they give out medications, that all those medications are tracked. Understand the role of the AT student. So if you do have students, whether they are students coming through an accredited program, or they are just student aides at the school, it's typically a good practice that they should not furnish any medications. Obviously, they can kind of be part of the process with you there. Obviously, you're the one actually giving out the medication, and they could be a part of that process, but they individually should never be getting medications for patients. So that's really important to note. And again, make sure that you're following the requirements from the directing physician regarding standing orders. So if your team physician has given standing orders regarding the over-the-counter medications, or there may be some over-the-counter medications that they don't want you giving out, that would be something that you would want to communicate with the team physician. So some other guidelines for managing medications. Again, a responsible provider must be authorized by the state. So again, the state laws will dictate a lot of times, you know, who's going to be really responsible for different aspects of managing the medication. There is the potential that a DEA license may need to be acquired by the provider. So this is a license through the Drug Enforcement Administration. Again, they enforce federal laws related to controlled substances. So depending upon what types of drugs you're going to have at your facility, you may have to have a DEA license in order to operate. The prescriber may transport controlled substance to locale only with a DEA license. So if you're going to transport controlled substances, you need to go somewhere where they have a DEA license. Another important thing is that orders written for the team are not permitted. So in other words, there cannot be general team orders written regarding giving medications out. They have to be specific to an individual. The athletic trainer may have limited responsibility as far as administering drugs. So administration of a drug is giving a single dose, and this will be with over-the-counter drugs. Coaches may not be involved with medication management, and again, AT students may not manage medications as well. So that's a really important thing. If you have over-the-counter drugs that you administer based on your team physician orders, you may do that. Again, the student may be involved in that process with you, but you have to ultimately, as the certified athletic trainer and the licensed athletic trainer, be ultimately responsible for that. And again, violations are going to carry significant fines and possible sanctions. So again, just make sure, and again, this should be something in place. Again, your athletic training facility is a healthcare facility, so it should function as such. So again, whether you're, if you're new to a place where it's been run for a while, obviously talk to your supervisor about that. If you're in charge, make sure these things are in place as far as the medication management is concerned. So administering and dispensing drugs, so we've been utilizing these terms kind of back and forth, and I kind of hinted to what each one of them are, but here we're just gonna kind of spell this out. So administration of a drug is giving a single dose for immediate use or for use within 24 hours. Okay, and this is very common in athletic training settings. Athletic trainers are permitted. Again, under the standing orders, so it'd be important in your standing orders to have this written out that you can give out a single dose packet of an over-the-counter drug for immediate use or within 24 hours. That's as opposed to dispensing a drug. Dispensing a drug is preparing and providing multiple doses. So that is something that will be done by a physician, for instance. We kind of talked a little bit about the whole idea with those accrediting bodies earlier on about sample drugs. So, many times prescriptions, physicians will have access to, will be given sample drugs, samples of prescription drugs in little individual packets. Sometimes physicians will give those to patients in multiple doses. Again, there's certain rules and regulations that's very important that are followed with that. Athletic trainers, if you're going to be traveling, again, should have a formulary or a list of medications used by healthcare facilities. And again, you could also have them for your facility as well. So when traveling, you should have a formulary of all the meds that you're taking with you, over-the-counter prescription meds. If individuals have prescriptions for certain types of meds, you should have those. Again, anytime dispensing of any over-the-counter drug should be at the direction of the physician. Generally, no medication should be administered to minors. So, this is important. So if they're less than 18 years of age, many times high schools do not even keep medications in their facility. Again, that's something that, again, could be at the discretion of the person supervising, but no medication should be ever administered to minors. Athletes older than 18 years of age should have what are called an assignment of benefits. And that's something that would be, again, that's another documentation thing that an individual would have. And again, what that does is it just provides a legal authority for pharmacological and other treatments. So again, that's just a statement that is basically created, and it just kind of helps when basically if you're going to transport and administer a drug on a patient's behalf, that they understand that you're kind of, it's documented that you're kind of the person in charge of their health care, and that you're going to be responsible for, kind of storing and transporting the medication that they're currently taking. Again, over-the-counter drugs in AT students, they should never convey over-the-counter meds to patients. So if one of your patients needs an over-the-counter med that you're going to administer, you should do that. It should not be the student. And the AT student cannot stock the inventory. So, it's really important. Again, AT students could have the experience of working with you with these things, but they can't be individually responsible for it regarding the medication. So they need, you need to be there directly when any of this would be done if you're going to have AT students at your site. So, been mentioning a lot about federal and state laws. Again, there's a lot of things governing the use of medication, so it's important to kind of be aware of all of these different laws. And so, again, a drug is a substance that creates a physiological change within the body. Again, it's going to be administered by one of a variety of routes. So, again, variety of routes, meaning basically, oral, inhaled, injected. Absorbed through a patch, which we call transdermal, dissolved under the tongue. Those are all different ways. And again, we're going to be talking about all different types of drugs individually, so we'll get to see that. Again, the entire sports medicine team should be familiar with the laws. So make sure, particularly as it relates to the drugs that you're going to have on site. Are you going to have prescription drugs? Are you going to have controlled substances? If you're going to have controlled substances, there's specific things. Obviously, for instance, there needs to be a DEA license. You need to have them stored in a very particular way. So very important that you're following that. And again, it's just good to be aware of the federal agencies involved in medication regulation. So a couple of the important ones, the FDA, they're responsible for regulating drug safety, the efficacy, and the security of different drugs. The DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, they're responsible for enforcing laws related to controlled substances. So that's why I say that if you are going to have controlled substances, you should have a DEA license. Some athletic training facilities, even if they don't keep controlled substances, they might get a DEA license anyway. Even if they have regular prescription meds, they may do so. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, they oversee concerns related to the contamination and exposure to hazardous drugs. So these are all different administrations or agencies that are responsible for various aspects of drug regulation and management. So drug legislation, so again, we're going to mention some specific legislation that's been very important throughout the years. So again, be familiar with this. Again, these are all things that are in the objectives of the individual chapter. So for the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, they prohibited mislabeling and adulteration of foods and drugs. So again, if something's going to be out there and marketed as a drug with specific effects, there's going to have to be specific labeling and that kind of just allows for transparency related to the drug. The Harrison Narcotics Tax Act established regulations for the use of opium, opioids, and cocaine. Marijuana was added to that in 1937. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act of 1938 required safety and purity testing for new drugs, so obviously a lot of importance there related to again, just making sure that the drugs that kind of are put on the market are safe and that they're purity tested for having in them what is said to be in them to make them as safe as possible. Some other important pieces of drug legislation, the Kefauver-Harris Amendment, which was in 1962, that required proof of efficacy as well as safety for new drugs, okay? So we'll talk about what efficacy is in a later chapter. Again, this was important, again, to kind of further make drugs more safe. So thalidomide, which was a drug, it was marketed as a non-toxic hypnotic. It was deemed to have negative effects on unborn children. So obviously this was something that, pregnant women couldn't take. So that's just an example of something that would be important as far as managing the safety of the drugs. The Controlled Substances Act in 1971, this scheduled regulated substances. So we're going to talk about the Controlled Substances Act. Again, the DEA is going to be responsible for overseeing the controlled substances, and we'll talk about why certain prescription drugs are classified as controlled substances and require a little bit more oversight than some other prescription drugs. And then the Dietary Supplement and Health Education Act, this kind of established some standard for dietary supplements. So again, people say, well, dietary supplements aren't regulated, but they kind of are regulated. There are some certain standards for them and kind of what has to be on their labels and things of that nature. So there are some regulations regarding dietary supplements, and we'll make sure we'll be discussing dietary supplements in addition to medications in this course as well. So the Controlled Substances Act of 1971, so we're going to discuss the controlled substances and kind of what makes them a little different from other prescription drugs. So first of all, controlled substances are going to be classified based on 3 factors. So one is their potential for abuse. So that's one of the factors related to how they'll be classified. 2 is their accepted medical use. So are they accepted? Is the controlled substance used for medical purposes? And 3 is the safety and potential for addiction. Okay, so those are kind of the 3 things. So when we look at the different schedules of drugs, of controlled substances, that's kind of where they kind of get based upon. So these are basically drugs that have there's potential concern for abuse and possible and potential for addiction. So again, they're going to be based per schedules based on those 3 things we discussed. So Schedule 1, there's no medical use and high risk for abuse, okay? And I'll talk about at the end. There's a table in your textbook that will give some examples of this. So for instance, heroin is a Schedule 1 drug. Very high risk of abuse, very high addiction concern, and there's no accepted medical use of that particular drug. Schedule 2, high abuse potential and psychological dependence. So there is very high potential for that. There's also potential for physical dependence, and we'll talk about the difference between psychological and physical dependence. But so there's high potential for abuse with this. Schedule 3, moderate to low potential for abuse and dependence. Schedule 4, low risk. Schedule 5, lower risk, lower abuse potential than Schedule 4. So you see, as we kind of go through these, again, the risk for abuse and potential dependence gradually starts to decrease. Again, you could look at, and I'm going to encourage you to go to the table in the text, so look for examples of this, and you can kind of see some of the different types. And again, some of the drugs that are in that list will be obviously expanding on later on as we discuss different classes of drugs. So traveling with prescription medications. So again, if you're traveling with over-the-counter medications, again, still very important. You kind of manage those appropriately. If it's prescription medications, kind of takes on a whole other level. So again, guidelines for sports healthcare professionals who travel outside of their state. Again, exercise caution and ensure proper medication management. So make sure all your documentation's in place. Make sure if you need an assignments of benefits, an athlete to AT agency form, make sure that is properly filled out. Management of controlled substances cannot be delegated to an AT. So very important. So physicians should not delegate ATs the responsibility to dispense controlled substances under any circumstance. The Sports Medicine Licensure Clarity Act is something that's very important. This was something that was actually fairly recent. If you notice, a lot of the legislation we talked about in the past, it was a pretty long time ago. This is actually a much more recent thing. So what this does is it provides ATs and sports healthcare professionals that they have protection when they are away from their home facility. So what this effectively means, and this was a fairly important thing, so ATs and sports medicine professionals who travel to states, again, will receive legal protection when away from home. So for the purposes of liability, healthcare services provided by a covered AT to an athlete or an athletic team or a staff member of an athletic team will be deemed to have occurred in the professional's primary state of licensure. So in other words, when you travel, if you care for your athlete, it's going to be deemed that you cared for them within the state based upon your state's license and their particular their particular state you're from. So care away from home will be covered under your home state license, because again, obviously, as we know, different states have different regulations. So that Sports Medicine Licensure Clarity Act, if you travel to another state, you're basically practicing under your home state license, not under that particular state. So that's something that's helpful when you're traveling. Now, again, international travel is a completely different thing. That's something that you're going to have to look at much more intentionally to make sure that you're following the appropriate rules and regulations. So with international travel, again, consult with the host governing nation prior to the trip. That's probably the best thing to do. So if you're, with an Olympic team or, a team that is going to travel overseas, consult with their governing organization prior to the trip. And I've actually been to presentations with athletic trainers who've traveled internationally, and they say this: carry as little inventory as possible. Rely on the team physician if necessary, but don't bring too much with you. Be aware of unique regulations, even regarding over-the-counter medication. So that's something to be aware of. And avoid any medications that can cause a positive drug test. So obviously there's drug testing that gets done with international competitions. Make sure that you're, again, you're not going to possibly administer anything, or that anybody is on anything that can cause a positive drug test. If that is the case, make sure, again, all the therapeutic use exemptions and everything that would be necessary are in place. So looking at drug development, so I'm going to change topics here a little bit and look at drug development. This is an important thing to be aware of, and athletic trainers have to have knowledge of. So establishing a new drug is a very complex process. Interesting, so the COVID-19 vaccine really kind of brought this to light, and how complex coming up with a new drug or a vaccine. It's a very arduous and rigorous process. And again, that's a good thing. It's to ensure safety for individuals that are going to be taking. So again, the approval process requires multiple steps, and in many cases requires years to complete. So that's something to be mindful of. Obviously, the COVID-19 vaccine, a lot of that, some of the stuff from the COVID-19 vaccine had been in place for years, that particular type of vaccine. So even though it seemed like it came out very quickly, the particular type of vaccine had been in research for years. So we're going to go through the development of a drug. So there's what's called preclinical research, which looks at microorganisms and animal research. There's company files, documents with the FDA to initiate clinical trials. So there's things that need to be in place as far as to start the clinical trial. And the patients involved with clinical trials need to be updated with risks. So again, when humans do get involved with the clinical trials, they need to be updated on potential risks and allowed to decline or consent to, and they need to consent to participating and receiving particular drugs when they are. And basically you need to look at anywhere from 4 to 6 years of clinical testing to kind of accumulate and analyze all your data when you're looking at drug development. So again, it is a fairly long process to make sure that drugs, when they, not only are they, number one, are they safe? Number two, do they work for what they're going to be marketed for? And then, kind of dosing and everything, kind of all comes out of these particular studies. Okay, so here we're going to look at the steps in the FDA clinical trials. And again, this is taken right out of your textbook, and this is something that I'm going to want you to be responsible for knowing for testing purposes as well. So here we look at before the phases start. So if you notice here, you have the preclinical trials. So you have the preclinical phase, then you have the clinical phase. So in the preclinical phase, the drug developers, which is typically going to be the pharmaceutical companies, are going to show the FDA the results of laboratory animal testing, and they're going to propose human testing. And there's documentation that needs to be in place for this. Phase one is if the FDA decides the drug is reasonably safe, The drug then gets tested on humans to determine safety, side effects, and how the drug is metabolized and excreted. So basically how the drug is utilized by the body. And again, anytime you take in a drug, your body has to be able to use it through the process of metabolism, and then you have to be able to excrete the drug. This phase typically involves 20 to 80 healthy volunteers. So phase 1 uses healthy volunteers. If phase 1 does not reveal unacceptable toxicity, so if phase 1 shows that it's that it's toxic to humans, then obviously there's a toxicity problem. It doesn't get to move to phase 2. If it's revealed that does not have unacceptable toxicity, phase 2 determines drug efficacy in 20 to up to 300 people with the disease or condition that the drug is supposed to then treat. Okay, so this is now where we're moving on to individuals who actually have the actual disease or condition. If evidence of effectiveness is shown in phase 2, phase 3 kind of gathers data about the safety and effectiveness with different dosages. So now we start to look at, what dosages is required. We're going to look at, what dosage, you start to see more side effects with, at what dose is their effectiveness with, things of that nature. Then after phase 3, it goes to an FDA review. This is a formal step asking the FDA to consider the drug for marketing approval. So again, this looks at all the animal and human data and analyzes the data information about how the drug is manufactured and how it behaves within the body. And then after receiving the drug, permission to the drug to be sold, there's safety surveillance done and ongoing technical support. Harmful effects discovered by phase 4 trials may result in the drug being no longer sold or restricted to certain usage. So it is a pretty long process. Again, I said anywhere from 4 to 6 years of clinical testing is usually required to kind of analyze all the specific data related to drug testing. So, typically by the time a drug has been brought to market, it's been studied pretty extensively before, before use for use in humans and in treating certain diseases. And again, a lot of that is to determine the safety, the efficacy, and again, even like dosing and things like that to determine how that gets done. So again, the actual drug studies, as we kind of outlined, so again, they will only begin in humans after investigational new drug research is approved by a local institutional review board. So an institutional review board is a panel of scientists and non-scientists in hospitals and research institutions that oversees clinical research, basically to make sure that the study is acceptable, participants have been given consent and are fully informed of their risks. So, before those drugs are given to healthy humans, in that phase 1, they need to make sure that all the individuals involved are aware, look, this is what, the potential, negative effects of the drug are, the potential harmful effects. This is why the drug is being studied, that make sure that they've done that. So again, if successful, the final step basically, as we went through, is basically having a new drug being able to be taken to market. So as we've shown, there are several steps required to earn that FDA approval. And again, that's for the safety of the patients and to make sure that they're going to be getting a drug that is also effective. Okay, looking at drug standards, so there's several organizations that will then publish drug standards. So again, they will list known values of the drugs, strength, quality of various drugs. Prior to standards being set, drug levels could range from ineffective to lethal. So again, once, drugs have kind of gone through the process of the FDA approval, then these different organizations will kind of post information on the particular types of drugs. So the most prominent drug standards and organizations in the United States, so these will also serve as a resource for healthcare professionals. One of the things you'll see as you're going through this, there are so many drugs out there. Part of your responsibility as an athletic trainer isn't to necessarily know every single type of drug. So it's also important for you to be able to know your resources. So these different organizations could also serve, while they kind of list drug standards, they also serve as a resource for you as a healthcare professional. So the United States Pharmacopoeia National Formulary, their drug listing regarding source, chemistry, physical properties. They also talk about things like storage and dosage of a drug. They also provide directions for compounding and just general use of the drug. So a really good resource there regarding many types of information about certain types of drugs. The physician's desk reference and prescriber's digital reference. These are provided to hospitals and updated annually. This is also another really good source for healthcare providers to have on hand. Again, you're not going to know there's new drugs coming out constantly. So this is something that as an athletic trainer you should probably actually have on hand. When I was practicing, I had access to a physician's desk reference for drugs. And again, this provides some other things. So it's a manufacturer provides trade name, accepted usage, side effects, dosages, etc. So this can be something very useful. There's an internet resource for this. Again, this provides as another resource regarding standards and information regarding different types of drugs. So in summary, the AT should be familiar with many pharmacology concepts. So this chapter just kind of looks at some things regarding laws, legal issues, and again, some things are going to vary, but you should be aware of some of the particulars that we brought up and discussed here. Again, so you have to comply with relevant laws and regulations. So again, understand prescription and OTC regulations. Again, probably most of what you'll be handling in many settings will be over-the-counter drugs, but you need to understand prescription drugs. You need to understand controlled and non-controlled substances, team travel regulations that affect your AT facility. So again, at your AT facility, you have to look at what types of drugs are you going to have there, how you're storing them, how you're documenting are going to all be important things. And you must be aware of again, public information, again, various websites. So again, have resources, okay? And we're going to talk about resources in another chapter, but that's another important thing. There are a lot of different, apps and websites that you can use. Again, just make sure they're reputable. We're going to be discussing some of them, so you'll kind of know what you can use and what will be a good resource. And these are your objectives. So again, when you're studying for your test, use your objectives as your kind of baseline for what you're going to be required to know.